Hello and welcome to Business Finishing School. Let your business brain finish what your entrepreneurial heart started. Our catalyzing statement is a successful entrepreneur inside of every business. Enjoy this module.
Welcome to this month's module, The Fear Paradox. And it's incredible for me to imagine that you've been in the program this long. So by the time you get to this module, you probably know a lot about Patrick and I. You may have come to a live event. You may have seen Patrick be embarrassed on stage standing next to me. But this is a fun module in many regards. And I say it's fun because it's leverageable. When I look at the title of the module, The Fear Paradox, I want to read the paragraph under it. It says, in this module, we will show you how to use fear to leverage yourself. It's been said that fear is when you wet your pants, but courage is what you do with wet pants. And the reason we put that in the descriptor for the module is because all of us have fear. Oftentimes when you're up on stage, I know a lot of people in the audience will say, I could never do that because I'm too afraid, as an example. But the fact of the matter is, all public speakers had to get through that fear to become a public speaker. So whenever you have fear blocking you from doing anything, trust me, it's just like working out in the gym. Once you work out a few times, you'll be able to get beyond it. And that is so incredibly powerful, because people generally put a box around themselves, a box around their business, and a box around their growth, because they don't realize that they could peek over that box and jump out of the box and ultimately be on the other side. So that is the essence of what this module is about.
I think the reason we characterize this as a paradox is because it's somewhat ironic. Typically, your areas of fear are where your areas of potential growth are. Since this is all about business acceleration, one way to accelerate is for you to get out of your comfort zones. Basically, if you understand the comfort zone concept, your life, your habits, your patterns, and we are creatures of habit, creatures of patterns, and we develop these patterns based on our known experience and what we're comfortable with. Fear is where we start going into unknown realms. And as a result, we get anxious and we want to retreat back. So the basic edict here is this: all growth for you and for your business is outside of your comfort zones. Everybody's got a different comfort zone. Growth for yours is outside your comfort zone. Now, the way that you know when you're moving toward the edge of your comfort zone is when you start to feel anxiety, your palms start to sweat, you get a little bit of butterflies or nausea in your stomach, all those kinds of symptoms. And as soon as we start to have those symptoms, human nature is, let's retreat back to the center of the comfort zone where we know we're comfortable and we're dealing with our known experience. Unfortunately, that also prevents growth and transformation in your business. So the idea here is to get to the edge of the comfort zone, feel those anxieties, and push through anyway. One example I would give as far as the stories comes from our Total Solution program, where we have one of the elements, we do a high ropes course, and one of the elements is this pole, what they call the pamper pole. It's really called the quantum leap, but they call it the pamper pole because that's what they feel like you need to wear when you're climbing it, because people will, kind of soil themselves with fear. So what happened basically this one time is we had this gal who was completely terrified of heights. And what they're doing is, the idea here is to climb a telephone pole. It's about telephone pole height, maybe a little taller. Get to the top, stand on it, and jump off. And you're being supported by two teams of people who have ropes hooked up to you, etc. So just to give you kind of a theater of the mind image of this. So what happened was there was this ladder at the bottom that you'd climb to the top of, and then you start climbing the pole. Well, this little petite gal who came, I was facilitating her the pole at the time. She came to me, tears streaming down her face. I said, what's wrong? She said, I'm terrified of heights. She said, in my kitchen I have a little step stool I'm afraid to get on top of, but I'm going to go see what I could do anyway, because the whole thing was to take perceived risks to learn to break outside your comfort zones. Well, she gets to the top of the ladder and she's shaking. She grabs the pole and she's shaking like this, and people are trying to scream and cheer her on, and they're saying, come on, you could do it. And they're trying to literally yell her up the pole, and she was tuning it all out, and she was clinging on for dear life. So I got everybody quieted down, and I looked up at her and I said, what's going on? She said, I'm terrified, I'm afraid, I'm paralyzed, I feel like I can't move. I said, let me ask you a question. Can you be afraid and take one more step anyway? And she released her grip, she stepped up another level, she grabbed the pole and she started shaking like crazy again, and the crowd went crazy and they're all screaming. And again, can you be afraid and take one more step anyway? And up she went. The long story short is that she made it not to the top of the pole and stood on it, but she actually put her hands on top of that pole, and then she came off. There wasn't a dry eye out there looking at the courage of this woman. And the whole issue is this, and this is where I think, it's not a matter of not wetting your pants, but what you do with wet pants. The question is here, and the challenge is, can you be afraid and take one more step anyway? I don't think there's any such thing as a fearless leader. You hear this thing about fearlessness. Pure fearlessness would be irrational. Of course we should have some fears in our life. The question is, are you going to let your fears prevent you from taking steps, bold steps that you know right now you need to do based on your purpose and based on your business, or are you going to let your fears put you in the box that Rick just described, keep you there, and prevent growth, prevent expansion, prevent your purpose from being manifest in a bigger way in the world? So that's the paradox. So the thing that you're most afraid of right now is probably the thing that you need to be thinking about breaking through right now as a barrier. That's where your growth opportunities lie.
And if you think that we're not talking to you because you've overcome your fear, we are talking to you. And the reason is, no matter what level you're at, even if you have a $2 million practice or a $20 million business, or you're running a $100 million factory, whatever it is, there's always a next level. And I love the quote that I heard from someone named Heather Rice, who said, 100% is easy, 90% is hard, because at 90% you have to rationalize and justify and all that. As it relates to Patrick and I, in our relationship and our accountability group every Wednesday morning, Patrick knows that I will be on that call Wednesday morning, 7 o'clock to 8:30, 100% of the time. I haven't missed in 3 years and 3 months. Now, obviously, if on the way to make the call, I got hit by a bus, I wouldn't be on the call.
Actually, if your phone worked, you probably would be.
Yeah, if my phone worked, I would be. But so many people have a fear about fully committing to something. Marriage, oftentimes, I got married very, very late in life for the first time. And there was this fear about, can I be monogamous? Because I had never experienced that before. So fear raises its ugly head in many, many different forms. I do want to read a couple of definitions, but I want to start with this whole nature of paradox first.
Can I interrupt? Because
Sure.
they're gonna wonder, when he said for the first time, he's only been married once. He keeps confusing people with that. He had the joke about, marry your second wife the first time, and people are saying, oh, so he's been married twice? No. He's saying he got married later in life the first time, and he's still on the first one, thank God. And if I were his wife, I'd be terrified. That'd be a rational fear.
You'd be terrified to be married to me for life?
Yes, exactly.
Marriage is such an incredible thing. I don't know why anybody would want to go through it more than once. So let's talk about a paradox. A paradox, according to dictionary.com, is a statement or proposition that seems self-contradictory or absurd, but in reality expresses a possible truth. So to Patrick's point, I want to delve in a little bit. Why did we call it a fear paradox? And to reiterate, it's a paradox because oftentimes the very thing you want, okay, the very thing you want in life is the very thing that requires you to get past certain fears in order to have it. And it's a paradox because you're saying, I want that, but I'm not willing to do this, and you could clearly identify what this is. And it could be a commitment. It could be a change of behavior. It could be moving. It could be changing businesses. It could be firing your sister who's driving you nuts. It could be many, many different things. And we'll make a list of some of those things. And where's the fear coming from? Because what my experience of fear is, I loved your story, by the way, about the girl climbing the pole. My experience of fear is, I will have so much anxiety and worry about making a really difficult decision, But once the decision is made, 100% of the time, I am in a way more powerful position. Isn't that true for you too? So why is fear and its associated cousin, worry, why do we allow them into our lives? So now the people that I was talking to before, when I said you, which means everyone, you're starting to realize, oh, I get this. You have anxiety about decisions. You are stalling important decisions that you need to make right now. When you take fear and its cousin together, worry or anxiety or stalling a decision, all of those things are a form of fear. You've got some decisions to make.
And that's incidentally, to further the example, there's the old adage that it's not the employees you fire that keep you up at night, it's the ones you don't fire. But you'll hold off making that decision because you're afraid of the confrontation, and the angst that goes along with that. So that fear actually prevents you from taking the action on your business that you want to. And quite frankly, what I know, and I'm going to say statistically, probably about half of you right now who are watching this, about half of you probably have employees that don't belong in your business, and it's fear or anxiety that is preventing you from making the right decision to increase the probability of your business succeeding. And that's where this whole business acceleration happens. When you overcome fears and anxiety, it accelerates your business in a dramatic way. And I know that you're already starting to tick off in your head things that you could be doing that when you shut this thing off, if you took action on it, would accelerate your business. The other thing that Rick brought up, talking about the cousin to fear, what he referred to as worry. The popular author, the psychiatrist Ned Hollowell, wrote a great book on this, and he makes a distinction between what he calls, I guess would be rational worry or concerns, things that you should be concerned about, versus irrational or toxic worry. And it's the toxic worry that drains your life and makes you sick and makes your business sick. So as you start to look at the things that occupy your mind, and one of the things that we want you to do is to start making a list of the things that you have fears about or worries. I want you to distinguish between something that's a valid concern and something that is just toxic worry that's not rational.
In the descriptor for the module, we wrote, you will be reminded that there's no such thing as a fearless leader. You will learn how to move fear aside so that you will be skilled in taking the right action in all situations. And finally, you will learn a new context for managing fear and using it as fuel for greater success. So we want to make sure, as a brand promise, that we have you think about those things. And there's some exercises in an implementation guide. But the first thing is this. There is absolutely no such thing as a fearless leader. It doesn't exist. And yet, oftentimes, we look at people on a stage or on TV or in the ring with blood on their face, to use a cliche, and we think, wow, they're fearless, but I can't be that way. And that's nonsense. That's why we started with the box. You have to be able to peek over the box. Just like Patrick said, can you have fear and do it anyway? So many of the answers to the questions that I just presented or the comments I just made will be on the application side of this module. But for now, what we want you to do is recognize that you are someone that is not operating at full potential. And what is full potential? Full potential, in my opinion, is someone who honors the frame in their business life. You're in business, you're in a business program, you want to be better at business. And the frame that we have laid out for the program, and if you're up to this module, you've seen it, it starts with 5 things. But it starts with, what is your purpose for your business? Once you have your purpose, you then go to number 2, what is your catalyzing statement? Then you go to number 3, what is the strategy for my business? And go back and evaluate that if you don't know what it is. Number 4, what are my objectives that align with my strategy, which aligns with my catalyzing statement, which aligns with my purpose? And then lastly, what are those tactics, those things that we need to get done on a daily and weekly basis? I have found that people this far into the program who haven't cemented these 5 things, they haven't done it because of a number of things. One of them is fear. Why else would you not just add water. What do I mean by that? I was so happy at the live Business Mastery Intensive Boot Camp that Patrick and I were at, that the people that were glowing, the people that had doubled the size of their businesses, the people that had the most success were saying things like, I just printed the modules, watched the modules, printed the implementation guides, did the homework, and lo and behold, in a year my business doubled. And I didn't hear that from one person, and I didn't hear it from two. I heard it from many people. How is that so? Because they don't have this fear that paralyzes them. They don't have that like woman hanging onto the pole. They just did what was asked of them as a customer of the program. You see, I've interacted with a lot of successful people in the world, and what I've learned about them is if they have a certain amount of trust in where information is coming from, they go for it. They realize that in order for me to be better, I have to use the intellectual knowledge that's around me from people that have done a lot of the prior work. In my opinion, you cannot get to the next level in life unless you've taken data that's been accumulated or learned from others, and you keep moving up. And what's that famous quote about standing on the shoulders of giants?
I think it was Newton that said, if I see further, it's because I stand on the shoulders of giants. And he was quite a giant himself. I mean, Einstein said of Newton that he thinks maybe the greatest intellectual feat in human history was Newton's invention of the calculus. So for him to make that statement, that pretty much says that the point is driven home. You build off of what came before you.
Exactly. And the thing that we're trying to say is, oftentimes in interacting with some of you, many of you, and just in the business world, people want to doubt and worry, and is this right, and I'm not sure, and they don't do the work. Whereas the way you and I have approached life is, you want to be in an accountability group? Sure. You want to meet every week for 90 minutes? Sure. You want to read this book, and I've read this book, you've read this book, let's take this book and let's build on it. We don't spend a lot of time doubting, arguing, worrying.
And I'll tell you though, the reason is because of we have in place values-based decision-making, catalyzing statement. We have a doorman in place. So we get less fearful about our decisions because we're so crystal clear on our values. And that's where, from modules 1 through 12, when you do the basic principles, that's where that's almost the shoulders of the giants that you're standing on. If we were insecure about our values or unclear about them, if we didn't have a doorman at the front door, then suddenly we would be very maybe skeptical about, well, should I do this? I wouldn't have the confidence in being able to make those decisions that quickly, that when concept of the accountability group comes up, I understand it immediately aligns with my values, so I can say yes to it. Rick, immediately passes my doorman based on knowing what his values are and who he is. So it's easy to say yes to it. It's when those basics aren't in place that you have the insecurity to make decisions, and you're paralyzed by fear rather than having confidence as a leader that moves forward.
For me, this brings up an important point. Patrick and I are on video together, sharing information with you. And oftentimes when two type A's get together, there's a fear around, will I look good? Will I look bad? What if he makes fun of me? Do I have to explain myself? All of that. And it's interesting, I have a lot of relationships in my life where I have actually set as a ground rule, don't explain and don't get defensive. Sometimes on our accountability groups, someone will say something so true and such a zinger, it hits me right between the eyes. And you know what I say? Give me more. What else you got? Tell me more. I want to be the best that I could possibly be. Oftentimes in situations like that, people get upset, they get defensive, they quit, they leave. Why wouldn't you want the people around you to tell you what your blind spots are, to tell you how you can improve, to tell you how you could be a better person? And if we didn't have that mindset, I could tell you right now, you and I would not be here, because just like the Beatles split up at the prime of their career because of ego and jealousy and infighting, but I wrote that song, you can't take credit for it. I mean, those type of fears and anxieties have destroyed countless opportunities for great progress.
In the case of the Beatles, I think it was a doorman issue letting Yoko Ono in.
Yeah, well, there you
that ruined the whole. See, that's a perfect example of the doorman principle, not being in place, and as a result, the greatest rock and roll band of all time, is destroyed because John Lennon didn't have his doorman. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, let me. I like. Patrick is. Are you more the color guy here, and I'm the content? How does it work?
Well, I guess it goes back and forth sometimes, but I'd say, yeah, you basically focus on the principles, and I kind of color them up.
Yeah, but so going back to one of my obsessive compulsive personality disorder, what would you call that? Manifestations. I want to read the definition of fear because it aligns with how I look at this. Fear is a distressing emotion aroused by impending danger, evil, pain, etc., whether the threat is real or imagined. The feeling or condition of being afraid. And it goes on and on and on. So 99.9% of the time, fear is what? Imagined. This woman that we started this module with that was clinging to the pole, what Patrick left out was, because I've been there and I've seen it, and many of you have done ropes courses, was she was buckled up so tight that if a tank came and knocked the pole over, she would have been fine because there was other things holding her up. I mean, she was so safe. She was safer than walking down the street in New York City by a mile.
It's a perceived, and the whole point of the exercise, and maybe we'll talk about this in the implementation side, but the whole point is that it was a perceived fear. And he's right. She had more of a risk getting hurt walking back to the room than she did on the ropes course being hooked up the way she was. So let's talk about the neurobiology of this for a second. So I think if we can get into your rational brains a little bit to understand how some of this works, I think it leaves a platform to really help push you through on the other side. What is unique about human beings is the fact that we have a neocortex. Fear lives in the midbrain, in the limbic system. Our rational mind, our example for abstract conceptualization, is in the neocortex. So what happens, we have this old fight-flight mechanism that's an appropriate life-saving mechanism that's built in to and hardwired into our systems, much like all animals. Mammals are going to have fight-flight. They have a midbrain. But we have a neocortex that other animals don't have, where we can think about things. So just to give you kind of a brief example, I think it's Joseph Chilton Pearce talks about this in one of his books. And what he says basically is, we have, years ago, our species could be walking through the jungle and we might come across a saber-toothed tiger. It would be appropriate fear response. It would be not an irrational, but a rational fear response for suddenly us to go into a state of fight-flight to save our lives, meaning our sympathetic system starts to accelerate. Our pupils are going to dilate. Our senses are going to get more acute. Blood is going to go out from the gut and go into the trunk muscles to give us more strength. We're going to see our heart race faster, our blood pressure go up, and all kinds of things happen. So if we have to fight for our life, we can. And if we have to get the heck out of there, we can run as fast as we possibly can in an effort to save our lives. So that's an appropriate response to a real situation, and fear is a life-saving mechanism. However, human beings have this unique thing, and this is the paradox, if you will, this unique thing where they can sit in a room alone, where they are perfectly safe, and imagine 100 different ways that a saber-toothed tiger might attack them, and initiate the whole fear physiology, the fight-flight physiology. They can initiate that in their lives when there's absolutely nothing to be afraid of. And that's the majority of people in our culture today. War, terrorism, all the bad news, the bad economy, the partisan politics is what's fed into our brains all day long, creating all this sympathetically biased fight-flight stuff. And we stay in a state of chronic anxiety because of perceived fears of bad things that might happen. And that is the toxic worry and the irrational fears. So what we have to get to here is to start identifying, and we'll talk about this in the implementation part of this module, but we have to start identifying what are our toxic worries? What are the irrational fears that we have to contend with that's robbing us of our energy, putting us in a state of defense? And there's defense physiology and then there's health. When you're in defense physiology as your chronic pattern, you cannot score points on defense. If you're going out there and trying to grow your business and you're in defense mindset, there's no way for you to score points. So what we have to do is break that pattern, get into an offensive mindset, and grow from there.
It's interesting, and Ned Hollowell, who Patrick referenced earlier, his research has shown that it has been determined that neither plants or animals experience worry. They just don't have that gene. They react to the data that's in front of them. Now that's good and bad. So clearly we need to have this ability to think. That's what makes human beings better. However, there's thousands upon thousands of other species of both plants and animals that have flourished, which brings me to a point. This has been in countless different articles, but one that jumps out to me is an article I read in the Wall Street Journal recently about someone who had a really bad head trauma, and they were a trader on Wall Street that traded stocks for a living, and they had a so-so career. When they woke up from a coma, unfortunately their brain had lost the ability to worry or to experience fear. I'm not sure what type of trauma it was, and that's not relevant. But the interesting thing was this man actually stayed in his marriage, and he made for a difficult husband because he didn't worry, he didn't experience fear. But ironically, he became a superstar trader. He was able to make business decisions with large large dollar amounts. And he wasn't worried about fear and greed and all of those things that happen when you invest. And it was an interesting story for me because it made me realize that if we can conquer the fears that we have, ultimately there's success looking over the box. So thank you for watching this part of the module. We're going to go right into the application section now. Stay tuned. All right, welcome to the applications section of this module. So one of my favorite quotes is, "Only when the rules are clearly defined can true creativity flourish." And this implementation guide is a nice frame for you to answer questions and get you to be creative. So there's a structure to it which will elicit creativity, which is one of the reasons why I find that the people that do the implementation guides and apply everything, they are the ones that are experiencing a doubling of revenue and a doubling of income.
Right.
So what we want to do is start a little bit looser and have you think about all of your fears, which some of you that are tougher will probably say, well, I don't have any fears. Mm-hmm. So we're going to start going distinguishing between certain types of fears, and then we're going to move you down to all of the decisions that you may be forestalling. Is forestalling the right word?
That's a good word.
Okay.
Yeah.
Forestalling to me means...
I'm also his reference dictionary.
Forestalling to me is you have to do it anyway, but before you do it, you're stalling. That's why it should be before stalling.
So the point here, what Rick is trying to say is that what we want to do, and I think what the thing to think through is this: aggregate a list of all your fears that you can identify. And what also, the point I hope you took away from what Rick just said is that you may not be aware of all your fears. Maybe you're a little bit more stoic and maybe you try to just ignore them. So it's important to go to people you trust who know you best and say, what fears do you perceive I have? What do you think that I avoid based on fear, or what my anxieties are? You know, your spouse, business partners, staff, best friends, etc. So the idea would be assemble a list. Once you have a list, and the longer the better really, I would get excited about discovering this. Don't be afraid of finding your fears. You know, let's talk about a paradox. I would be excited about saying, boy, there's some real rich stuff in here for me if I can find a blind spot, something I don't see that's preventing me from growing in my life and growing in my business. So make as comprehensive a list as you can, and make sure that you do some interviewing with your inner circle, the people closest to you that can give you some information. Once the list is set, the second step now is to split them into two sides. And there will be another split after this, but the first split is, what is a normal fear or an appropriate fear that I'd have, and what's irrational? And as soon as you can start to identify, wow, this is toxic worry in my life. I'm worried about stuff that I should never be worried about. And you know, there's many examples of this, but it could be something as simple as, I'll give you one example, we won't mention any names, but somebody who's got literally cash resources of over $1 million in the bank, well over $1 million cash resources, a business that's doing well, and suddenly there's a slight downturn in the business, and he becomes preoccupied and anxious about going broke. And it has to do with something in his history that basically, you know, he had things, came from a scarcity background, has accumulated a lot of cash, was probably motivated a lot from that background, but every time there's the slightest little bump in the road or the downturn where he should have no fear, he gets paralyzed because now he's worried that he might go broke again. And as a result of that, it's one of those, you know, what you fear most, you bring upon you. So you have to really try to manage that. So what's rational and what's irrational in the fears that you make the list of? That's step one.
One of the things I want to add here is there, in the past few years, there was a multi-billionaire who's on the Forbes 400 list who recently went to jail for insider trading. And the interesting thing, when they interviewed his employees after it, because relative to this person's net worth, which was massive, the amount of money that he was making on insider trading deals on the side was minor, it was so tiny. You know, why would you risk all of this and to go to jail for a long time? Why would you risk all of this by doing this? And what his employees said was they didn't understand, but this guy was always thinking that he was going to be bankrupt. He was a billionaire. And so he wanted every edge. He wanted there was no rule that he wouldn't break related to insider trading to make a little bit of money. And to me, that was because of what you just said. Yeah. He had this massive fear, and he wasn't able to, and this is what we do when it's irrational, and he had a massive irrational fear. He wasn't able to balance the risks that he was taking, okay? And oftentimes we have this irrational fear, and we don't realize that it's destroying our relationships with our kids. It's destroying our marriage. It's destroying potentially a superstar employee staying with us for a long time. It's destroying the long-term sustainability of our businesses. You know, I have been involved in many, many, many situations where I'll walk into a company and I'll say to the owner, that employee right there is destroying your company. Why do you have a fear for firing them? I don't have a fear. It's not about fear. It's about, you know, we have a long-term relationship. They're destroying your company. And I can't tell you the number of times that 2 years later, that important employee did destroy the company. They flipped with the feds, they stole money, they embezzled, they did some type of blackmail, they
destroyed your most important relationships.
Yeah, stole the database, took the client base, whatever. And you have to look at the balance between things that you're fearful about making a strong, firm, hard, decisive decision about, and the catastrophic consequences to what is most important to you.
So what would happen now is when you looked at your, call them rational fears and irrational fears, and obviously the irrational fears are things you just need to go to work on, and maybe that's a part of your accountability group. Put it in your objective saying, I want to eliminate this from my life, I want to eliminate this from my life. Have your accountability partners hold you accountable and just work on those that way. On the flip side, the things that you've been afraid of that are not necessarily completely bogus or irrational fears, but are still anxieties that you have or fears, like firing an employee or going out and speaking publicly or any number of things that could be holding you back from growing your business. What the next thing should be is to identify the top 3 or 5 that would have the most massive impact on your business should you overcome them. And if you want to extrapolate this out to your life in general, your marriage, your parenting, your health and fitness, whatever it might be, extrapolate out. Since this is business training, we're talking in terms of business, but it applies everywhere. So now say, where can I get the most leverage here from this module? And I will tell you, this one module and this one exercise, which to me might even seem somewhat mundane, kind of, you know, flat in the sense of it's not that complicated. But this one simple thing could easily double your business. So hopefully you're leaning in a little bit now and paying attention, and this is what it is. Again, top 3 to 5 things that if I were to change this, and this is literally character changing. You're going to change your character. If you weren't the type of person who would let go of an employee that was hurting your business because you were too nice, you were too empathetic, you were worried about whatever dynamics might adversely affect them, etc., now is an opportunity for you to say, my character shifts. I've suddenly become that business leader that is afraid but takes steps anyway, and the result is I have massive breakthroughs in my business. So the thing that scares you the most is probably where your biggest weakness is and your biggest opportunity for growth and transformation. Make the list, put the ones, prioritize the top 3 to 5, and then your job is to go to work on overcoming those fears or breaking through those fears, getting outside the comfort zone, and watch what happens to your life. It will be shocking to you how things change. I'm going to give you one example that we got from our Business Mastery Intensive. If you've been in the program this long and you have not been to a live Business Mastery Intensive yet, you are missing the boat. One of the feedback we got just this past week, tenfold value, that once we went to the live event, it made the value of the modules tenfold more. One person got up in front of the room and said that she implemented the doorman principle, and you can see that she was a little bit more, she wasn't a driving personality, she was more of a meek, good-natured person that wouldn't want to offend somebody. She was also very shy. I made her come up in front of the room because she was afraid to speak in front of the room. And she said that I applied the doorman principle, and there were 5 new clients in the last 4 to 6 weeks that I basically, once they came into my intake process, I said no to. And the consequence of that is that I not lost business, I doubled my business. Doubled the business just because she decided to implement the doorman principle, and as a result, something that would normally have scared the wits out of her had turned her into a business leader. That's what we're talking about.
The interesting thing about that story, Pat, is when I heard her on stage, I thought she had a small business. She actually had one of the largest companies in the room, and that's what made the story more compelling. The reason that we have the application split off from the principle or the beginning is because we want you to think about how you can apply this to your life. One of the things I want you to do as you're doing this program is don't look at the implementation guide until you watch this all the way through. Because oftentimes what Patrick and I do is we'll re-edit these tapes, and at the end we'll create an implementation guide that summarizes everything we talked about. So everything Pat just said will be in some form on the implementation guide, and then we may think of some other exercises. But what happens is, and I've heard this firsthand, people will have the implementation guide in front of them, they'll be watching the module, and don't do that.
Right.
Watch this, shut down your computer, print your implementation guide, don't do it online, and write your notes there or on a separate piece of paper, but have it printed and in front of you without the video running. So I want to talk about a couple of things on the personal side of my life that have made a huge transformation for my wife and I, and it involves the fear paradox. One is my mom recently passed away at the age of 81. And about 7 years before she died, one of the things that we always battled our heads on was this issue about money. And we would get into these long arguments about money. And for years, I had this fear of exercising my doorman. And I just had a fear. I didn't want to do it. So one day, I just took a step out of the box, and I said, Mom, if I'm on the phone with you, because I called her every Sunday at 10 a.m., and sometimes we would have long conversations, but that was the rhythm. That was the rhythm. And you remember rhythms to amplify time and success. It amplified our relationship because she knew at 10 o'clock, hey, Rick, how are you? I decided one day, it was an immense amount of courage, I said, Mom, if you bring up money, because she had this massive issue about money. I don't have enough money. Can you borrow? Can you give it to this person, that person, your sibling? I said, if you bring up the word money or even refer to it in any way, I'm hanging up the phone. Because I thought if I hung up the phone on her, she'd never talk to me again. And so I hung up the phone. Next week I called, and within about 30 seconds, she brought up money again. I hung up the phone. Next week I called, but it took about 5 minutes, hung up the phone. It took about 2 months, but once she understood that my doorman was firmly in place, once I understood that I had to get past my fear, our relationship blossomed. And I had the strongest relationship with her for several years before she died, because I was able to get past my fear and also exercise the doorman. Another thing, another application, my wife and I, we had some deep long-term relationships with couples. We love to have dinner parties, as many of you know. We love to invite interesting people into our lives. But one day we sat down, and it came from a lot of anxiety and fear and worry. We said, we have determined that there's certain couples that we want in our lives and certain couples that we don't want in our lives. It was very hard for us to literally cross some people off the list. But in order for us to have the life that we wanted and to have the level of engagement with our friends that we wanted, there were certain types of people that we wanted into our life. There was no judgment that these people are right or wrong. It's just we wanted something different. And having gone through the fear crucible, for lack of a better way of saying it, we actually crossed people off the list. We didn't put any more attention or time or energy into managing those relationships. And in a sense, we upgraded our relationships. Now, you might think, well, that sounds judgmental. Here's the bottom line. If you allow people that are pulling you down to stay in your life, it's exactly like the story of those crabs trying to get out of the bucket. Those crabs, if you take these little crabs on the bottom of a bucket late at night, you can get them in the ocean. One will try to crawl out of the bucket. Just before it's about to break out of the bucket, one will jump and hook itself on, and another will hook on, pull him back down. And then he tries to get back out again, pull him back down. That's what these people that you are afraid to get out of your life and out of your business and out of relationship with, that's what they're doing. They're going to pull you back down. There's nothing wrong with them necessarily, but they just might not value what you value. So that's the second thing. Third thing that I wanted to point out as an application, be straight with people. And if people are not willing to take your straightness, then they probably don't belong in your life. I was recently involved in a business deal, and I would have had to be in bed with this person long term, and this person is someone whom I love. I've known them for a long time.
So you're going to be straight with somebody you had to be in bed with?
Exactly. And keep that on the tape. Don't cut that out. And it was funny. Every time I was straight with this person, they would get defensive, and I found myself in hour-long conversations about their defensiveness. And even though I loved this person, even though I respect this person, I had to make a decision, and there was a lot of fear. I had to remove them from my life because I realized that I didn't have time to have in my life people that needed to take hours to explain their defensiveness. We all have that. So just cut. And if you need to evaluate the doorman module again, which is values-based decision making, go look at it. So we've given you enough applications. We've given you enough example. I feel like, do you feel like we've hammered this home?
Absolutely. I think you're ready to go to work now. You see the influence and the power of this. Go to work on it. Like always, every month, schedule a time, follow the process, and the outcomes from following the process will be significant, and that's what we want. We want your success to shine. Thank you for watching this module of Business Finishing School. Let your business brain finish what your entrepreneurial heart started.